Why, hello everyone! It's been a while since I've made a video. Especially a video with my face in it. Yeah, just a lot has happened recently, and a lot has been on my mind, and, a lot of things I've been thinking about, and, I don't know, just basically, I'm gonna summarize here. All the projects that I kinda wanted to do, and I thought I'd have the passion to do, I haven't done yet. Nothing's come to fruition. Maybe after this video, I'll have, the energy to do it, but for right now, I really don't have it. All I've done recently, though, is watch several movies, and even my movie reviews, which I love to write, I have not written any. I just never really had any urge to do it. Usually after I watch a movie, I'm like, oh, I want to say my thoughts, I want to spill them right now, and lately I just haven't. So, usually I write them on my Letterboxd, which I'm not really going to force you to follow because, it's mostly for film buffs and stuff like that, but I'd rather just plug it anyways. But, so it's been a while, and I want to catch up with writing reviews, and I want to write reviews because I want to do reviews because it helps me remember what I thought of a movie. I've watched so many, and it helps me keep track. I don't really need to keep track because I kind of remember what I watched, but I like to remember what my certain thoughts were at the time, and I remember, like what certain aspects I liked, what I didn't like, and it just kind of helps me learn along the way what I think works and what I think doesn't work and what I kind of want to make, and just all kinds of nerdy film stuff. So I need to catch up on doing this anyway, so I thought, why not make a video? Why not, kill two birds with one stone? I get a video out, and it's a way for me to get my thoughts spilled out on movies that I would have just written reviews for otherwise. I mean, I'm just speaking them. I mean, it's still the same thoughts. I still have to... it's still basically the same thing except video format, so... I don't know how many of these types of videos I'll do in the future, but because especially this is just so random. It's just a random hodgepodge of movies, but I don't know. I thought it'd be interesting to do that. I don't do a lot of just like straightforward movie reviews on my channel, so to do something kind of more laid back, I thought would be kind of interesting, at least for one video. So let's begin. Kevin Bacon plays an aspiring filmmaker who wins a short film award, becoming an overnight sensation. He immediately gets hired by a producer to do a studio film. He has an idea of his own, but producers reject it until Bacon becomes an overnight sensation again. Then he gets creative control, and that's the story. So basically the premise of this film is, Hollywood sucks unless you get lucky, and then it's a dream come true. Meanwhile, every aspiring filmmaker is like, yes, I know that. So what is it telling us that's new? But I'll get to that. From the beginning, though, I had some issues. Okay, so Kevin Bacon's character does have a name. It's Nick, but he basically plays Kevin Bacon, so I'm just going to be calling him that for the rest of this review. So let's start with Bacon's short film. It has good cinematography, but no story and no real writing. So how did it win? Not like the other short films they showed were much better, but Bacon's was clearly style over substance. The cinematographer should have received more praise than Bacon. Next, those other short films, filmmakers try to recreate what student films can feel like, with the wooden acting, awkward zoom-ins, blurry shots, and limited sets. Okay, first problem, student films aren't always great, I get that. But even student filmmakers know that blurry shots and bad line readings don't go in the final cut. Second, if these student films actually did include such noticeably flawed qualities, how in the world did they make it to an awards event? Unless every other film up for qualification was freaking atrocious. There's no way these films would even be nominated. Third, Bacon's is the only one that looks like it was shot on something not 35mm film. Since when do young filmmakers have access to 35mm film? Even 16mm would have been more realistic, but to have Hollywood film stock doesn't suit the aesthetic they're going for. Okay, back to Bacon's short film. The fact that Bacon struck a deal that same night from one simple project doesn't seem like something that would ever occur without more meetings or discussions held. I was never rooting for Bacon's character throughout. He just isn't likable. At one point, he literally admits to his girlfriend that this actress he met at a party is a bimbo, yet the next afternoon he rushes out to go see her. Then he later gets back with his girlfriend as if nothing happened. Maybe it's to show how Hollywood corrupted his mind at the time, but it doesn't make you want to root for him. There are ways to write despicable leads and still have you want to follow them, and this movie doesn't showcase any of those ways. What hurts this movie throughout is that it can't decide if it wants to be a parody of the industry like Ben Stiller's Tropic Thunder or a satire of the industry like Robert Altman's The Player. Approach is important for something like this, as it helps determine tone. Tropic Thunder was more over the top in its attack, whereas The Player was a lot more sly. Both work in their own right and both are great films. The big picture, on the other hand, can't decide whether it wants to be silly, such as with the style homages and larger-than-life producer in his cave, or an entirely ruthless approach that quote-unquote exposes the industry in some hysterical manner, such as the producer having weird quirks he wants to include in his films, or Bacon having to apply for side jobs while waiting for his successful pitch meeting. Because it can't decide whether it wants to be more goofy or grounded, the viewing experience is rather uneven, milquetoast, and forgettable overall. Plus, this inside look is pretty dated and irrelevant nowadays, as up-and-coming filmmakers wouldn't go through this exact same process anymore, with more film festivals and viral videos giving us the ability to notice more talent than ever before. The backstory behind this film is much more interesting than the film itself. This was the first film that was allowed to be released from a Hollywood studio that was explicitly anti-Nazi. I appreciate the historical importance of what the Warners put out there, but it doesn't hold up nowadays due to being convoluted in plot, too unsure of its tone, because it has a narrative at some points, but then it switches to a pseudo-documentary tone like the Why We Fight series at others, and is just unengaging all around in terms of writing, direction, cinematography, and more. We all know today how bad the Nazis were, and you'd think that would make the movie inherently dated, but I honestly believe this could have been made in a much more gripping manner. It's all about Nazi spies getting codes and ruining American morale in private, then holding meetings with large groups of the public in attendance. I just feel like there's a way you could have made this a much more fascinating exploration of these true life events. As is, though, it was quite boring and the pacing was monotonous, making this film that's over an hour and a half long feel like 2.5 hours. And this is coming from someone who loves history and was truly curious to check this out. The film's heart is in the right place, but unfortunately I just don't feel this specific approach to the material led to the most entertaining one. P.S. In one of the subplots, there's a character who looks like the love child of Kyle MacLachlan and Bruce Campbell, with a few genes of Robert Downey Jr. sprinkled in, depending on the angle you view his face from. P.P.S. I find it interesting how this movie pretty much predicted the US would enter World War II soon enough. This came out in 1939 and ends with the FBI agent basically saying, "We'll do something when the time is right." The plot involves a hostage negotiator taking hostages and making a negotiation to get another hostage negotiator to negotiate with him. Everybody got that? Well, I'm just gonna move on anyway, so. It starts off a little slow, but once the main plot kicks in with Samuel L. Jackson taking hostages and Kevin Spacey entering the picture, it becomes more entertaining. The conspiracy itself, though, the one that initiates this whole hostage situation, can be a bit complicated. It's not helped by the fact that the internet is this magical aid within the realm of the film, and certain tasks can be performed and found quite easily. Suspension of disbelief wouldn't have been as hard for an audience 2 decades ago like it is today, but I can't get over now how there's just this convenient archive of wiretaps on a computer, and the authorization to get in is a simple tactic, some password, and boom, you got all these files and recordings at your disposal. I honestly can't decide what dates this movie more: the way they portrayed computers with convenient authorization access and containing every piece of relevant evidence, or the sequence where characters dance to Cotton Eye Joe for 1.5 minutes. But besides that, it moves at a consistent pace, has a surprisingly good dynamic between the two leads, and doesn't overstay its welcome for a thriller clocking in at almost 2.5 hours, so that's always nice. This is one of Stanley Kubrick's earliest films. Even if you didn't know that this was a Kubrick film going into it, you kind of get the feeling that this wasn't just helmed by some nobody. Someone of notable talent clearly directed it. Judging by the cinematography and the long takes, you can tell that this was probably directed by someone with an eye for perfection, and a director like that was definitely Kubrick. The plot involves James Mason playing a professor named Humbert Humbert, who pays rent in the house owned by a widow who has a daughter named Lolita. Humbert becomes fascinated with this underage girl, who eventually becomes his daughter, and does everything he can to be with her without directly saying that he loves her. It's written by Vladimir Nabokov, aka the guy who said, "There are no good readers, only rereaders." The first 45 minutes or so is actually my favorite chunk of the film in regards to how it established an interesting plot and set of characters. My favorite part of the film, however, was easily Peter Sellers. I'm pretty sure that I assumed he was the lead when I first heard of this film. In fact, I didn't know James Mason was the real star until the opening credits. Sellers shines in this film, and is a case where the supporting character becomes way more memorable than the main character. Unlike Dr. Strangelove, where Sellers plays multiple different characters, Sellers plays a character known for acting and disguising himself in several personas. This was the perfect role for him. It's an odd role, especially in the grand scheme of this otherwise grounded film, but yet perfectly fitting for him, and I can't imagine the film without his presence. Humbert, played by James Mason, is not a very likable or sympathetic character, as what he does throughout, trying to win over Lolita, this underage girl who eventually becomes his daughter, is morally wrong and disgusting. It's possible to make a dumb or unlikable character someone you want to follow, but the problem with Humbert is that he's just not an interesting person. He's so bland, which, to his credit, is, I think, part of the point. However, the problem lies in the fact that I don't know how anyone would fall for his charm, whether that be through Lolita's subtle flirts, I guess, or her mom who wanted to marry him. For as risky as the film's content tries to be, and is, it's odd to think that so much of this was censored. While the Hays Code was barely being enforced by this point in film history, it was still around. It's hard subject matter to translate, and I think Kubrick did as good of a job as he could. He said later that he wouldn't have done it knowing how much would end up getting censored, but I think the scenes that remain in the film do show a more risque side of Hollywood, that the Hays Code would inevitably have to be broken because of films like this. The envelope isn't completely pushed, and I wouldn't call anything seen here groundbreaking, but it is out there, especially to films of the time. Some scenes are great, and others are straight up awkward. Again, I don't know how much was intentional due to the nature of the story and what the filmmakers could and couldn't get away with, but still, a couple scenes and minutes could have been easily trimmed. The remaining scenes just drag, though. I remember one scene with Peter Sellers playing a school psychologist talking to Mason, going on for quite a while, to which I thought, I know what the point of this scene is, why doesn't it just end here? Also, the epilogue is the shortest, most straight-to-the-point statement ever. They flash epilogue on screen, then give a one-sentence statement to describe how our lead character ended up. Was there really a point? So short, and I didn't really need to know that. It's a bit drawn out at times, and it's not as risque as some of the stuff we've seen in the past half-century, but still one I'm glad I watched just for Sellers alone, and also Kubrick's directorial influence over the story. Chris Farley plays Tommy Boy, but he really just plays Chris Farley. David Spade plays Richard, but he really just plays David Spade. And they go on a road trip together to sell brake pads so Tommy's newly inherited company can continue to thrive. Of the bunch, this was the only one I had seen before. I rewatched this after work one night, and while it may not be as funny as I remembered it being the last time I saw it, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't entertaining. The movie is silly, but to its credit, it knows how silly it is. Farley has this fun, enjoyable presence to him, and while I may not be a huge David Spade fan, I have to admit that he plays the perfect straight man here. You can tell that Farley and Spade were real friends off camera because their chemistry here is that great. The jokes can be over the top and the plot can be predictable, but it's nevertheless a fun ride. I laughed a number of times, and for a comedy, that's all I really want. In these tough times, and after a long day, I saw it on TV, not really knowing how much I'd watch. I ended up sitting through the entire film, commercials and all. I guess it was really just what I needed to unwind at that certain time. Not an all-time classic in my opinion, but for the most part it still holds up. There's plenty of joy and amusement to be had. This was my first introduction to the Marx Brothers and their style of humor. I was barely familiar with their work, all I had seen is one clip of them, but as soon as I got the gist of what they were like, I was really into it. Groucho Marx plays a guy who gets thrusted into a position of leadership and is a complete imbecile and kind of a dictator, as expected, and spies, played by two of the other Marx Brothers, try to get the war plans that are inside his safe, which makes up an extended sequence of the film. Maybe I should have eased myself into what many consider their most popular and arguably best film by, actually watching their other films first, but I inevitably got into the funny physical humor, the fast-paced energy, and the extremely clever wordplay. I got into all of this more than any of the Three Stooges stuff I've seen, another comedy act not too far attached from this era. Groucho is by far the highlight, which helps given how central a character he is, but it's the other brothers that are memorable too in their own right. While I have to admit that I thought one or two gags were stretched a little too thin, I have to admit that the ending of this film made me laugh out loud several times. I was enjoying the film quite a bit up until this point, a lot in fact, but that ending sealed the deal for me in being able to recommend this film. It's genius. It's kind of like a Mel Brooks comedy if he made comedies in the 1930s. Of all the comedy directors and actors, etc. the Marx Brothers had to have inspired, I just feel like Mel Brooks' persona and wittiness was the 1970s and 80s equivalent to them. It works as a parody of dictators at the time like Mussolini, and just a fun general audience comedy. If you're not familiar with old style comedies, it's worth exploring to find out what they were like, and it's surprisingly short too, so even if you aren't the biggest fan, you won't feel like too much of your time has been wasted. But really, I feel like you'd have to have enjoyed at least a couple bits by the end. The concept of this film intrigued me and is actually quite relevant. People get addicted to an app and it dares them to do stupid, life-threatening things. That's the same as other dumb trends that spread through Vine and TikTok and such. It also takes all your info and creates a personalized experience for you. That's scary. This girl named V wants to become a player, not a watcher. So she signs up for this app, which gives you money if you successfully complete a dare, and each dare escalates in severity, becoming more uncomfortable as illegal. I didn't even know that this was based on a YA novel. And given that bit of information, I was way more entertained by it than I thought I was going to be. There were some flaws I noticed right away, most of that having to do with the factor of the internet, which is just so hard to pull off. Trying to be modern is so often hard to do no matter who the filmmakers behind it are, to be fair. Contrivances like V becoming insta-famous when she first joins the game, despite telling no one that she created a profile. Within her first dare being complete, she gets a lot of followers, and at one point she becomes #1. All within a night. Highly improbable. Even if it's like early YouTube or TikTok, which I'm not sure how the latter works, but for whatever small amount of dignity I have left, I will not create an account to find out, it's still unlikely she'd explode in such a short time span. The silliest thing is how this friend of V is a hacker with a bunch of hacker friends and are somehow able to access the dark web. The dark web part is hard enough to explain, but this friend manages to find all the data he needs to know in about a minute. He gets some passcode and boom, finds everything. Then at the end, slight spoilers, I guess, they hack the Nerve app and it affects everybody and everything goes back to how it was pre-Nerve. Like, if these hackers are all so powerful, why do they try to be like this underground group? They're doing things that they, nor the movie, can explain. With all that said, every aspect was probably better than it had any right to be. The lead actors were likable enough, the dialogue wasn't nearly as cheesy as I thought it would be, the modern pop soundtrack actually helped fit the tone, and the cinematography was very nice, with flashy colors and a sleek atmosphere. They even used effective dolly zooms in one particular moment. Dolly zooms are so cool when pulled off right because they can really escalate the tension, and this film managed to do that. Okay, back to some flaws though. At one point, they say the dare must be filmed on the person's phone, so if V gets a dare and accepts it, it must be filmed on her phone. Okay, makes sense. But during her first dare, it's the hacker guy that films her. Okay, so I guess it just has to be on her phone. It doesn't exactly need to be her filming it. Okay, that still makes sense. But at one point, one of V's friends is doing a dare involving heights, and she starts it, and then she's like, oh crap, I gotta take my phone out and film myself, which makes this balancing even harder. Meanwhile, I was thinking, you knew that you were going through with this dare, and you know that you have to go from one side of the building to the other, and other people are watching you from both sides. You couldn't have asked someone at the beginning or ending spot to film for you? Why wouldn't you have done that? Granted, these are all supposed to be stupid idiot teenagers, and the stunt she performs is still death-defying whether she has an arm held out to film herself or not, but that just seems like the first thing I would do if I was a stupid idiot teenager put under such pressure. Again, slight spoilers, but not really. The third act is probably the weakest. It sort of jumps the shark with how powerful and influential the game and its hosts are. Like, society just accepts that these anonymous people go around the city and control everything. At least before, it had some sort of realistic influence over people. The third act was a step too far. It also ended too happy. Like, the last 2 minutes wrap a perfect bow on what would have been a fine ending before. Now, it would have been dark, don't get me wrong, but I think it would have helped solidify the message they were going for. The execution they were going for also seemed to have been effective in showing what freaking idiots all these teens and young adults are for playing the game. A game that is essentially the movie Yes Man, but for teens and on mega steroids to the extreme. That's really all. That's my description. I'm sticking with it. The message would have been a little on the nose and a bit of a downer, but sometimes you need an ending like that, one that will stick with your audience more. But for what I thought would be a disposable young adult thriller was actually well made in most regards, and didn't seem as pandering either. Though it might have benefited most in the dialogue and plot departments, it's not awful whatsoever. I started watching this at like 1 in the morning, and for me to want to stay up and finish it really says a lot when you judge that I'm watching this at 1 in the morning. Usually if it's past midnight, I try to give up on watching any kind of movie, and even if I do start something, I normally don't finish it. And with Nerve, I managed to complete both, so good job, Nerve. By the way, how many of you like this blanket? It's sports themed, and I don't even play sports. You know what, it works though. When I'm sitting in my chair, I kind of like the blanket on me. I don't know, just helps comfort me. Take that as you will. Okay, so anyways, yeah, you as you've probably seen in the video, I have a complicated relationship with films. I mean, I love film, but I have kind of a different perspective on each one. I have a different opinion. Sometimes it's not always the popular one. Sometimes it's, just my own connotation with a certain idea or a theme or a plot, a character, whatever it may be. Sometimes it's just the zeitgeist of the time, like whatever's on my mind or whatever is popular right now. I'm just like, I'm watching it and I'm like, oh, I really dig this, and then maybe I just, over time it just becomes, I don't really care for it. And that happens a lot. Sometimes I think highly of a film, and then over time I just lower my rating. And then sometimes a film I'll be like, yeah, that was okay, or yeah, that was good, and then over time my rating will grow. So, you just never know. And that's why I like to get my thoughts out, so that I can kind of remember what was my mood at the time, and like what types of films grew on me and what aspects grew on me. I like to keep note of that stuff so that it helps me realize what kind of things I could do. Again, nerdy stuff. I don't know. Engage with this video if you'd like, I guess. Comment what you've watched recently, besides my video, of course. And I don't know. I don't know anything really. Just I'm not gonna force you to, but if you'd like to keep conversation, I would love some good old human interaction. So yeah. See ya. Yeah. Let's see ya. I don't know. Yeah, so yeah, hopefully this video I'm working on, maybe you'll see, I don't know when you'll see future videos. I was kind of hoping this more laid back one would kind of just ease me back into making videos again, but who knows when it'll be. I just kind of wanted to put something out there for you. Okay, now I'll just say, see you later. Adios, audience.